British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been forced to resign. Despite 44 resignations from his ministerial and other colleagues, Johnson had been still trying to survive. But then the wheels of democracy kicked in and he was left with no choice but to quit. The only struggle being now to stay on as caretaker PM. The race is currently on to select a new leader from within the Tory Party, as it finds it difficult to counter criticism from the people as to why the members stood by and silently watched Johnson make a mess of governance. The new leader will make an impact domestically. In fact, he or she should provide the governance the people have been denied for some years now, and in doing so, revive the fortunes of the party. But what difference is this change going to make to UK's current relations with the world? As the unprecedented meeting of the MI5 and the FBI chiefs in London seems to suggest, will UK and the US strengthen the strategic partnership against China? Will UK continue to play a leading role to cement NATO? Will it remain Washington's proxy, or will it follow a slightly more independent foreign policy? For this and more, we go to former Ambassador JN Misra. Welcome to this edition of Off Limits. Our guest today is former Ambassador JN Misra, who has been posted in different parts of the world, like all Indian diplomats, Portugal, Laos, and he is also delivered lectures on the Foreign Service Training Institute. He writes regularly on foreign affairs. He takes part in seminars, and he also is very interested in sports and is currently the vice president of the Jawaharlal Nehru Hockey Tournament Society, as well as an advisor on sports to the Odisha government. So sports is another time, for another time, Ambassador. But this time, of course, we are right in the middle of very exciting news. Boris Johnson has quit as the Prime Minister of UK. What do you make of that?
Well, thank you very much, Seema, for inviting me on your outstanding show, Off Limits. I have seen some of your presentations, and you give an alternate voice to people who need to be heard by the general public for a more informed discussion, because we are seeing one side of the picture very often. We need to see the other side. And it's a really great show, and I'm proud and privileged to be with you today. Boris Johnson's, thank you. Boris Johnson's resignation was coming for some time, because he was struggling. There was a no confidence motion some time back, and British politics, of course, is so much dependent on the Britons who are not of indigenous British origin, such as Indian Britons or Pakistani Britons, or from Africa and West Indies, etc. So that kind of situation, you saw Rishi Sunak after he resigned. He called for the Prime Minister to step down, and so did his successor, who had been appointed just a couple of days ago by Mr. Boris Johnson. But as far as its international ramifications are concerned, I think that's what you wanted me to perhaps speak more about, rather than the domestic politics. It's very clear that it will have a very short-term, immediate impact on the coalition, the Anglo-US coalition primarily, but others in the Ukraine war. The war is now finally going in a direction that Russia perhaps wants it to go on the ground, with the Luhansk region under Russian control and access to the Black Sea perhaps more secure than it has been in the recent past. So there is a possibility of some kind of a climb down. There's been ups and downs, diplomacy, war, because war is only a means to an end. War is never for itself. We all know that. Nobody fights and kills just to fight and kill. So if there is a very small window of opportunity for the war to take a course towards some kind of a closure, that satisfied all sides. Now, as far as Boris Johnson is concerned, well, he was trying to use this war for domestic sustenance domestically, for his own political survival domestically. And so is Biden doing the same in the United States. You may not get the majority in the House. We hear of that in the not too distant future. So therefore, there is a domestic political angle. There is hubris. Now, the Europeans are bewildered. Whatever we might say about a grand coalition within NATO, etc., the Europeans are actually getting the gas and perhaps getting the oil, of course, and the lecturers, but they do it nevertheless because they are so symbiotically tied to the Russians that you just can't decouple like that. You'll be shivering literally and dying.
Well, they seem to be shivering. The economies are reeling now.
Oh, absolutely. They have been impacted, and the sanctions, which seemed really deadly and ferocious in the beginning, Russia has found a way around the sanctions.
Now let's just get back a little bit again to Boris Johnson, which it is interesting to say that it's just a little glitch in the larger external politics. But how much damage has he done to the UK itself? Because, the Guardian headline, I think it was brilliant. It says something like the rise and fall of Boris Johnson. So he has actually vitiated the atmosphere within Britain, hasn't he?
Oh, yes, he has. And obviously he has, because his own people within the party have there were 30 resignations, I believe. And yes, more actually. Yes, and so everybody pulled the rug from under his feet within the party. So it goes to show how unpopular he had become. Of course, it's easy for a leader in crisis to say that I've got the mandate. He got an outstanding mandate in 2019, but that doesn't really matter because you have to work with people. And so Labour will send an opportunity out here. But as I said, the domestic politics, the hubris and the Ukraine war, it all goes back to his domestic standing. And the war is basically fundamentally more of an Anglo-American war rather than a NATO war, because others have been extremely circumspect with regard to the level of military support. The UK has given its second in terms of military supplies to Ukraine during this war after the US. So he tried to use that. And as far as the domestic politics is concerned, you asked, it is an established democracy with well-established norms. And it's a very practical matter. Governments come and go, individuals come and go. They'll figure a way out to put up a new leader of the party and continue until the next elections. We don't know. But as far as...
say about the Tory Party, what about the Conservatives? Their whole moral rationale seems to have gone with Boris Johnson to some extent, hasn't it? Because they stood by for all this while and watched him make a mess of the British economy and British governance.
Yes, but there are also others within the party who are very capable, like Rishi Sunak. He has been talked, he of course had to fight some of his battles because of the situation surrounding his wife. But he was talked of as a potential prime minister. So Sajid Javid, there are other people. It's not just about individuals. And the larger question is, I have served in the UK. Is the UK ready to tilt towards Labour? I'm not sure it is, honestly, at this point of time, because as long as the Ukraine war is going on, and the domestic and the international aspects get intertwined, it's a lovely war. Let's go on fighting and let's go on winning the elections domestically. Let's be macho, let's be strong. Let's show the world how we matter. Brexit or no Brexit. Yes.
Sorry. Carry on.
Yes, please, no, I
in
finished.
this scenario, so obviously the Labour doesn't seem to be gaining from this at all because it also has its own mess within. But isn't it interesting that every other name that's coming up, one that led to him quitting and another who's supposed to be the successor, you mentioned all of them, all brown faces?
Well, that's the point. British politics has become not society so much, but the politics has become somewhat multicultural because of needs. I mean, Britain said Dominic Raab, when he was the foreign secretary, he said, your politics is also our politics. He caused great irritation in India about Kashmir. It is your domestic politics, it's ours because of the Mir Puris, the Britons of Pakistani origin. So when we talk of brown or black or white, at the elite level, you have to show these faces to give an appearance of being a truly multicultural society. You're not a multicultural society fundamentally, but I mean, culturally and socially, you are not, but politically, you want to show that. So therefore, well, it's a good sign. The more the merrier. It's a process and it begins.
Yes, but it's interesting because, you know, one side is the machoism that you have mentioned. One side is the nationalism that gets aroused when there's a war in the vicinity or anywhere where you're involved. And then on the other side, you also have the brown migrants or whatever you want to call them, who are in a position to lead and become next chief prime minister, or at least in positions of power. So will there be pressure on the conservatives to ensure that a white face sort of takes over at this particular point in time to address the concerns of society?
Well, given Boris Johnson's background and his base, you know, he's like a populist leader.
Yes.
He's like Donald Trump was. Donald Trump had a very solid constituency among so-called dispossessed white marginalized Americans. He had it all along. Even after he lost, he had it, and he still has it. So Boris Johnson has that kind of appeal. And I never speculate about politics. I'm not an astrologer. Anything is possible in politics. But that white face coming up as a kind of a backlash against the Browns, as you said, is very much possible given the scenario that we are in. But we also have to remember that the numbers matter. The Pakistani Britons I mentioned, they will swing in a certain way. The Afro-Britons, the Caribbean Britons, and of course, the Indian Britons are the quietest of all. They don't get involved so much. We know that. They don't fight for causes that concern India, certainly, the way Pakistani Britons do. So all these factors will come into play. But right now, it's about China. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to connect that with the domestic politics, if I may.
So before you talk on about it, can you bring in also the fact that they had for the first time the MI5 and the FBI meeting in London with a heads meeting? This has not really happened and nobody really remembers it. And then they raised this whole issue of China.
Absolutely. That's a very good question. And I don't have a very good answer, but I can make a guess based on what I know from in the public domain. First of all, you're right. It is absolutely the first public meeting. Well, the Anglo-American alliance, Boris Johnson wanted to use that meeting actually to show the alliance is alive and kicking. The Ukraine war is going well. I am the great leader, something like Margaret Thatcher, you know, I'm the great leader in a crisis and I'm going to win this. I have the mandate. It didn't happen. But the politics behind it, and the international ramifications and the connection between the domestic and the international remains. So the next leader will also do that. So that's why this meeting perhaps was orchestrated, perhaps I speculate, and I think Biden was lending some support to Boris Johnson in this enterprise by arranging this theater, Kabuki. It's Kabuki because it's not new. Now I'll come to that in a second, but before that, what does this meeting accomplish? It shows to the world that the Americans and the British are solidly together in this war, and we have strong supporters abroad. We are okay, we'll mend the economy, and I'll ride through this. It didn't happen. But the presumptions behind it remain solid and sound for the next leader, as I said.
Right. So it's interesting, you know, while you were talking, I was just thinking about it. You had Trump over there, you have Boris Johnson here, you had Bolsonaro, all people claiming popular support and all literally being dragged out of office, you know, and Is this something, is there a larger message out of this? These people who actually seem to have the popular support also become very delusional, and then it impacts on the whole situation within those countries more than I think external policies as well.
Yes, they are delusional in politics. All politicians are delusional. It's about power because it is the greatest aphrodisiac. We know that. So all politics is like that. So these people are delusional, and perhaps their successors will also be delusional, no less. Yes, they were delusional because they were out of touch. Boris Johnson was very much out of touch. Now, why is he cultivating a country like India, for example? I always like to bring in foreign affairs, and I'll come to that orchestrated meeting also. Now, all this is about domestic politics. And coming to the meeting, coming back, if I may now, to the, I didn't complete what I was wanting to say, the meeting between the MI5 chief and the FBI chief. Now, here are two individuals showing themselves very openly to the rest of the world. It is the kabuki par excellence, theater, and saying we are in it together and it's all about China. Now, why China? Let's go back to the strategic review of March 2021. The strategic review that took place, this is a massive event in Britain's foreign affairs and strategic posture. Now, people don't connect that, but I connect it because the strategic review said two or three very important things. Firstly, the Anglo-American alliance and the relationship with the US is the bedrock of British foreign policy. It is the fundamental on which it is based. And that's why we had this meeting, and that's why Biden and Johnson and Ukraine, everything is connected, as I said. The US is the most important ally. And do you know, Russia, not China, Russia is, quote unquote, the exact language, is the acute threat. And that explains the Ukraine war. Yes. So the meeting that happened is very consistent with what the strategic review said. There is no great surprise. The only surprise is that they went public about it, because intelligence operatives, chiefs, they work quietly. They work in the background. They never come forward. That's not their job.
But they also made it very clear that it's Russia, of course, but it's China.
Exactly. I was just coming to that. I'm glad you preempted me in a way. Thank you. Now, the review said, the strategic review, I have the exact language, quote, China's military modernization and assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific risks US interests. Now, they're talking about the Indo-Pacific. They're not talking about Quad. There's no mention of Quad in that review, but Indo-Pacific. And, you know, the US carrier force, the Queen Elizabeth and the task force deployed in the Eastern Indian Ocean and the South China Sea because of that. So this is, quote unquote, these are risks to UK interests. Risks to UK interests, and we have to build, quote unquote, China facing capabilities, and quote unquote, there is a state-based threat from China. This is the exact language of the review, and there is a systemic challenge from China. And what does Ken McCallum, the MI5 chief, say in this joint press conference? He's talking about, quote unquote, game-changing threats from the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. It's exactly the same kind of language. It's exactly the same focus. You're not talking about China as an existential threat, but an economic threat, an intelligence threat, of course, and a systemic threat through an alternative view of the world and an alternative view of politics, as opposed to the liberal democratic order on which Western foreign policies of the Western countries are based. So this is entirely consistent. There's no great surprise. Now, the next question is, why did they go public? I think they went public for domestic reasons, rather than because of anything that China had done recently to upset them or to create severe disequilibrium in the region or even in the Indo-Pacific. Now, coming to NATO, NATO is now also aligned with this vision of the strategic review and aligned with this joint press conference of these two intelligence chiefs. How? In the Madrid NATO summit, you had Australia, New Zealand, Japan, they were there, and Korea, they were there. They are aligning their approaches with that of NATO, and India is the outsider because India formally will not join an alliance. It's against our ethos, but India is very much in the picture through Quad, as an outsider, but as a supporter. So there is very much now a desire and a realization that, starting with Bill Clinton, the view was that let's get China into the WTO, let's make them a normal actor in the international system, let's help them fulfill their aspirations, and it's all about making money, it's the economy stupid, and therefore China will join the party and we will embrace and make up ever after. It never happened. China just used all this to increase its power, and now it's deadly assertiveness, and we are facing the music in India. So therefore, I'm looking at the totality strategically, the domestic, the international, the review, NATO, and the press conference. They're all part of the same plot.
Right. So obviously now we are also looking at the larger perceptions or the theatrics, because this meeting between the MI5 and FBI, as you've also said, wasn't really anything new. It was just that it was public and it created that perception that now Biden is totally behind Boris, or UK and US are working together very, very closely on this. How do you see now that you started with, and that's of course also the reality, that Russia is moving in the Ukraine war very much along its own path now. It seems to be well on the way of achieving whatever it wanted to achieve strategically. That's another story. And China is with it. So there is a certain strengthening of that bloc. So do you see this now sort of, and you have a desperate, slightly weak president of the US, Biden, who's not able to control everything, or is all the time trying to be more macho than he needs to be. So how does this all work out in the next phase after there is a prime minister in UK?
I don't think it'll make a significant difference. As I said, personalities change, but the new personalities, I don't think, because it's all about hubris, it's all about power, it's all about manipulating your foreign relations in your favor in domestic politics. Simple. Right. So the new leader will do much the same things. And what is the choice anyway? After Brexit, the UK has a somewhat ambivalent relationship, which it always had with continental Europe, with the major powers, even when it was in the European Union. So after Brexit, you need new partnerships, you need new alliance, and certainly you need to strengthen and consolidate the alliance, which is your all-weather alliance. You just can't afford not to do it. So that alliance will remain alive, kicking, and strong with the United States. Now, as far as China is concerned, it's very clear to me that the UK will undertake certain actions, but there'll be more posturing than real actions. The real music is faced by countries like India, which will have to counteract. To respond to China. The UK has no real need. Look at geography. It doesn't want to overstretch. It doesn't have the navy that India has today, for example. And India is not a great naval power. There are doubts about even our capabilities, our outreach in the Indian Ocean, let alone the South China Sea with Chinese power. So I don't think any new leader in the US or the UK will look at things fundamentally very differently. They will do some brinkmanship with China. There will be a kind of eyeball to eyeball confrontation. There will be face-offs, but I don't think they will confront beyond a point. You've had meetings between the leaders of China and the US. You had long meetings and conversations. You had a telephone call between the leaders. So, so the doors are always open. On Taiwan also, the doors are always open. And there is saber rattling, upping the ante on both sides. That will continue. And whoever comes into power in Britain as the new prime minister will more or less continue with the policies for both international, strategic, as well as domestic reasons.
So to end this with something about India, when the Ukraine war broke, so it seemed that we were actually riding the cycle without really tilting and trying to maintain this, well, I don't know if you can call it neutral, but at least trying to be neutral and not aligning ourselves with either side and voting accordingly in the UN. But slowly, obviously, we have tilted. We've tilted towards the Quad. We've tilted towards NATO without having to say so. We have, of course, very strong links with Washington. So what would you think would be the best policy? I mean, it's a tough question, but just for India to follow in the coming weeks and months.
Well, I don't have a very good answer to that. I don't think India has been neutral. India has actually, after initially being very careful and not calling out Russia by name, India did tilt in favor of Ukraine on certain matters, on humanitarian matters, for example, on sovereignty, territorial integrity, international law, the concepts that India has consistently spoken about in the UN and in our public statements. India did not play a mediatory role because it couldn't. Initially, our desire was to get our nationals, our students out. The safety of the students was the most important, and we needed to talk to Russia for that. Now, the US did not face that dilemma, nor did the UK. They have to understand that, because if you want us to understand your problems, you have to understand ours, and that was lacking. Now, but then they also made the adjustment, the US, UK, and others, in their public posturing, at least public statements, showing great understanding of India's position and the compulsions behind India's position. And so therefore, I don't have a good answer to this. Sometimes I wonder, should we go lock, stock, and barrel with even NATO? Given what's happening with China, we don't have the capacity to fight alone with China. We are called the swing state. Instead of swinging, should we stick to somebody? That's the question. That's a huge question. Well, I mean, as a foreign affairs person, Mr. Modi is great as far as bold steps are concerned, rightly or wrongly, but he's always challenging himself. I hope India does something like that and makes a step, say in Ladakh, that has some strategic value, because we seem to have lost the plot. So nobody's going to help us. Quad is not going to help us. I like to ask my American friends, you are saying reduce dependency on Russian arms. We are doing that. Today it's 46%, come down from something like 79% to 46%, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, are you willing to give us, not, you just want to sell us the F-15s and the F-16 rebranded as a F-22. You are trying to sucker us. No. Are you giving us any technology? You wanted to sign all the foundational agreements. We did that. You said, okay, great, sign the agreements, the 4 agreements, and everything will flow like water down the Ganga.
Right.
But the water is not flowing. There's not one worthwhile technological transfer from any of the Western countries, but the silver lining is airborne UAVs have been specifically mentioned in the 2+2 joint statement after the 2+2 talks with the US, and with Boris Johnson also after, during his visit to India. We are talking about technological transfers. This is the first time they are at least talking about it. Now, we have to get this from Russia because nobody else is willing to give it to us. And the terms and conditions would be appalling for us.
Basically, the conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. So therefore, I would love to see something more creative, because we are tilting a little bit this side and a little bit that side. We are called the swing state, but so far it has worked well. But the Chinese, the existential problem is China. They took spots of our territory in 2020. Yeah. There were some withdrawals from 3 areas, publicly stated. Yeah. Even that is murky. Even the details of that are murky. Nobody likes to talk about it. But I hear from people who seem to be informed and who are respected that these no-go zones are more on the Indian side, the buffer zones. So we have, in fact, the terms of the withdrawals of also from these three areas have worked to our disadvantage. Yes. And then there is Depsang and others. So I'm, as an Indian, as a citizen, I'm extremely worried about China. And if we have to align with anybody till we build our capacity, let's do it.
Right.
But that has to be tactical.
Right.
Right.
Right. Thank you. So this was a broad expanse, but very, very interesting. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and it's a great honor to speak to you.
Thank you. So what now? There will be a new Prime Minister in Britain. He'll most probably, or she will most probably be from the Tories, from the Conservative Party. There will be some kind of difference in domestic politics, and maybe Britain will be fortunate enough to see governance instead of complete non-governance. But whether it'll impact on the strategic world is a big question mark. China, and to a lesser extent Russia, remain the foes of the West, of NATO, of the US, and UK will, of course, follow suit. How it impacts on the rest of Asia, on Asia particularly, not the rest of Asia, but in Asia particularly, is something that we have to watch and see. Ambassador Misra said that India should find its zone, its resting spot, as it were. Let's see if we are able to do that too. Thank you.